Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Nick Yuskevich of Daily Fantasy Winners, bringing you the U.S. Open Part 1 edition, this episode of Tee to Green. And this is going to be a two-part series, basically, leading up to the U.S. Open. This is the Part 1 edition. The first part will basically be a general overview of the U.S. Open, some details about Oakmont Country Club and how difficult it is, and some strategy as well as far as attacking this from a PGA DFS perspective, and specifically toward the Millionaire Maker as well. For those of you who are going to be doing some other GPP lineups, maybe some cheaper ones, and don't want to do the $20 entry, and or just do some cash lineups as well, there will be some good information in here that'll help you as well, but we will be focusing on the Millionaire Maker a little bit specifically, certainly because it is one of the most popular tournaments in DFS. Okay, so let's dive into the U.S. Open. This is the second major of the year. It has been that way for a very long time. The U.S. Open is also often the toughest tournament in terms of scoring to par for the entire season. It is almost always the case every single year. This is especially true at Oakmont Country Club, where the U.S. Open is this year. The U.S. Open is coming to Oakmont for the 9th time. That is a record high for the USGA bringing the U.S. Open to a golf course. The USGA usually likes to move the U.S. Open around to a different golf course every year, but they will definitely repeat some of the historical venues. It's not an exact science or formula to it, but usually around every 10 years or so. Oakmont's been used quite a bit, as I just said. Pebble Beach has definitely been used quite a bit in the past. Shinnecock Hills has certainly been, Marion as well. But then they'll also have some new courses as well. They're going to Erin Hills here in the near future. They were at Chambers Bay last year, which was the first time it's ever gone there. So there's definitely a good mixture as far as what the USGA likes to do. West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, newer, older courses, and they do a pretty good job of that. So, but they're back to the U.S. Open here they're back to Oakmont here for the U.S. Open. That's mainly because it is the toughest golf course, basically, that the pros can play on for all intents and purposes. And they also go back here, basically, they call it it's the gold standard of golf. And I think that's basically paraphrasing for saying it's the toughest, because the USGA likes difficult golf courses and a true test of a man's ability. So, in any case, let's dive into the 2007 U.S. Open. So, why 2007? Because that's the last time the U.S. Open was at Oakmont, and then 1994 was the previous year before, the previous time before that. But 2007, Angel Cabrera won this golf tournament. This was the first of his 2 major championships, nearly 3. Cabrera's done well in majors before, but this was his first major, but he won it at 5 over par. So that gives you an idea of how difficult this golf course can be. Not only that was the winning score 5 over par, there were only 5 players who were better than 10 over par. So not only was Cabrera able to hold off Tiger and Jim Furyk in that victory, there weren't that many players really right behind him. And to go into this a little bit deeper, 10th place was 11 over par, 20th place was 14 over par, 30th place was 17 over par. So that's about 3 strokes per 10 places. So that gives you an idea of how crazy it is. And the last part I'll just say about this is how I said there were 5 people that finished, only 5 people that finished better than 10 over par. The cut line was 10 over. So that gives you an idea of how even difficult it got over the weekend. So the history of this golf course will suggest this as well. If you go farther back, there have been some U.S. Opens at Oakmont prior to this that played over par, but there were some that played under par as well. The main reason why it got much more difficult in 2007, there were a few reasons, but the main reason is they took out actually a lot of the trees on the golf course between 94 and 07, which essentially, while you would think eliminating trees would make it easier and giving a more links-ish style feel, it actually creates a lot more wind because the trees aren't there to protect all the wind gusts and everything around the golf course. And so that will make the golf course dry up a lot more. And when this is a U.S. Open and the USGA gets their hands on the golf course, that's what can really make it pretty darn crazy, especially on the complex greens. So more on that in just a second. Lastly, actually, before I move on to the details of Oakmont, just to give you an idea, Phil Mickelson, somebody that has been around for a very long time in golf, obviously, and he played in the 2007 U.S. Open. He mentioned after playing a practice round in the last couple weeks that he thinks that this could be the toughest tournament from scoring average that he has ever played on and that anybody has played on. It really could be that difficult, and that's saying something when he played in 07 when the winning score was 5 over. All right, let's take a look at Oakmont Country Club and some of the details of this course. It is a par 70 that tips out at 7,255 yards. Not that long of a course, really. It is a par 70, but 7,255 is not that long comparison to some other par 70s that the U.S. Open or some other golf courses have been. And it is, like I said, they took out a lot of the trees, so there's really no. There are a few holes where trees do come into play, and there's some tree lines that will come in a few holes. But for the most part, it's pretty open on both sides from the tree standpoint. There's also no water on this golf course, so it is interesting to think, how is this golf course so difficult when we don't have trees and we don't have water? Well, we'll start with this. The fairways are very tight and they are very fast. There are also hundreds of bunkers on this golf course. There are 210 to be exact. And some of these bunkers, and so it's not Whistling Straits territory, but at the same time, the 210 is a lot. And a lot of these bunkers are also very, for lack of a better term, awkward. And what I mean by that is they're very deep, and you can get some crazy lies, and especially you can have some awkward stances, like the Church Pews bunker, for example, that's just to the left of the fairway on hole 3. You have this very long bunker that runs down the left side of the fairway, and there are these basically grass pews, or humps, if you will, in the bunker, these mounds almost, and they every couple yards there's a grass mound like this that's very long and narrow, like a church pew would be. And so if the ball goes into the bunker, and even in the grass area, you get these crazy awkward lies that players are standing on, having sometimes to pitch out to the side, or just able to fortunate to blast it out into the fairway, or some people get greedy and not hit the ball high enough. All kinds of crazy stuff can happen. So that would be another example. But the main thing here, and you're probably seeing this, one of a couple things, but one of the big reasons here is the rough is very thick. There is an example, there are a few videos down below, and definitely check them out on the links below, but Justin Thomas is the one here that probably best demonstrated this during his practice run on Sunday. He took a golf ball just off the fairway on 17, and he dropped it, you know how you would take a drop if you hit the ball on a hazard. And he just dropped it in the rough, and you basically could barely see the top of the golf ball once after he had dropped it, because the rough is that deep and that thick. So that'll give you an idea. And there are also some areas where there is like a no-mow rough area, where the rough is much longer and even thicker than what the normal primary rough is. So lots of trouble on this golf course. But ultimately, what I really do think, because let's say, there are people that hit the golf ball very well at Oakmont and can stay out of trouble for the most part. There are some people that hit the ball better than others, of course. But what really can still make this golf course so difficult are the greens. Go to the U.S. Open website. I highly recommend you do this if you've never seen Oakmont before. Go watch the flyover videos. They're pretty short, and at the end of each flyover video, once they start the tee box and they get toward the green, they will show you how the green is laid out, basically, and the way it slopes and everything. And you will see, first of all, the greens are enormous, and you can't quite tell in the videos, but you'll see in the video how severe the undulation is, and how many different slopes there are, and how many different sections, and just overall how complex they are. Excuse me, some of these pins can be, even on some of these slopes, which makes it even more crazy. Makes it that much more difficult. What also is even crazy is some of these holes, if you'll see in some of the flyover videos, and then actually hole 1 is a perfect example, you can just go there. Some of these greens actually run away from the fairway. Most golf courses you're going to play on, the greens are relatively flat, at least from front to back, with all their slopes in the middle of it, but from front to back it's usually naturally fairly flat, or it is naturally sloping back to front. That's how a lot of the older style golf courses were built. Oakmont they were crazy and smart, but they were crazy. They took a few holes, and they decided to have the fairway slope away from you, which makes it very difficult, because obviously when the ball's coming in, you want some kind of a backstop, and you're usually putting spin on it, and when the green's rolling away from you, that makes it that much more difficult. And of course, when it's the USGA and it's Oakmont, and how firm these greens are going to be, all the more difficult. So Ben Hogan actually famously said, Jim Furyk reminded me of this on a podcast he was on recently, Shack House podcast, really good. I highly recommend you go check that out. Anyways, Jim Furyk was on recently. He reminded me that Ben Hogan once famously said, the way to play the hole is actually you hit your second shot on one, it's a par 4, you hit it over the green, and then you chip back to the golf hole because it is that difficult to hold the ball on the green. And if you're in any way, shape, or form short of the hole, you are just dead. So he would just it was one more of the famous Ben Hogan quotes from the past. And so in any case, that gives you an idea even more so how difficult it can play. As far as the green speed, what do they roll? The USGA usually shoots for about 14 and a half on the stint meter. I see no reason why that's going to be any different here this year. That's usually what it is each year. As far as what can you compare that to? Go look at the Players Championship third round this year. Some of the highlights if you didn't catch it. Watch some of those putting exhibitions, and that's probably what you're going to get at Oakmont. And the greens at Oakmont are much more difficult than what they were at Sawgrass. So that'll be just kind of a little give you a little preview or a taste. For what is to come, and lastly, and I've already mentioned this, when they remove the trees with the renovation, the wind will pick up and it'll dry out the greens, and so of course that's going to make it that much more difficult as well with the 14 and a half on the stint meter. So definitely, again, a reminder, check out some of the links below just so you can get a quick idea there. So let's move on to the par 5s. There are 2 par 5s on this golf course, number 4 at 609 yards, number 12 at 667 yards. The tee boxes can be moved around. The USGA has been known to do this in particular they like to move the tee boxes quite a bit on par 5s and par 3s. They will do that, giving some different angles, some different looks. For the par 5s, they will probably do it to both holes once or twice. It does depend a little bit on conditions and some moving things, but for the most, they usually do it once or twice. But even if they don't, on some of those days, the Bombers can reach both these holes in 2, particularly number 4, basis because it is about 60 yards closer, or shorter, I should say. But some of the Bombers can reach it just because of the way the holes are designed. The fairways are that fast, and the ball will roll out. There will be very few eagles, though, regardless. There won't be many. I don't think many people will be trying to drive, or probably none will be trying to drive a couple of these shorter par 4s. Just overall, from the Eagles' perspective, I really wouldn't worry about it too much, just because there will be those few eagle opportunities. But the Bombers will get them to you, as opposed to the shorter hitters, barring any hole outs. So let's move on to the strategy. So given what I have just said, you are probably thinking, okay, you need to find the fairway. We need to avoid bogeys. And we need someone who's basically a really good short game, who's really good at putting and scrambling, right? Because this golf course is that difficult. That's actually not what I'm recommending. Kind of going the other way here. And I'll start with this. After the 2007 U.S. Open, Angel Cabrera said, and I'm paraphrasing this a little bit, that the greens were so difficult that it leveled out the playing field and brought the good putters back, basically, to the average or the mediocre putters. And Angel Cabrera, statistically, over the years, has not been that good of a putter. Ernie Els won the U.S. Open in 1994. He is historically and statistically speaking not a very good putter. So there actually is some truth to this as far as good putters and good short games actually haven't won here. And if you look at some of the depth of these leaderboards a little bit in the top 10, top 20s of those couple of years, you actually will find out that the Bombers or longer hitters, not a huge correlation, but there's a little bit of a correlation to the longer hitters doing well as opposed to the shorter hitters. There have been some shorter hitters, of course, that have been right there in the past. Like David Toms and Jim Furyk did pretty well here in 2007. But for the most part, you're finding more of the longer hitters doing well. In any case, why is this? And so you're probably wondering, because it sounds like I'm saying that the shorter hitters might do well when I was kind of talking about some of the details of Oakmont. The reason why is having long irons and utility clubs into these greens are really bad. The greens have so many different slopes. They are huge, they're firm, and the rough is so brutal that it's so difficult to hit not only just a good shot, but to actually get a good result, and let alone have a reasonable birdie putt that's makeable. That's just extremely difficult from, when you're 190 yards out and you're hitting a 5 or a 6 iron in comparison to somebody who is 150 yards out, who's a bomber, and they're hitting wedge into the green. It is significantly different on some of these par 4s. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. And so you're also should probably recognize that even like there are a few par fours on this golf course that are under 400 yards. I think there's 4 that are under 400 yards. The length advantage will help there. And the reason why is these fairways are so narrow that it's like someone like Jason Day is a perfect example. When he was at Sawgrass, Jason Day you would think was not a good course fit for Sawgrass, but he decided, you know what, I could hit this 2-iron 288 yards. And so he would hit his 2-iron as far as some people are hitting driver. So if Jason Day can hit 2-iron on a 380-yard par 4 and have a sand wedge into the green, whereas somebody has to hit a 3-wood and try and find a narrow spot in the fairway, it's a big advantage for Jason to be able, or a longer hitter to be able to hit their driving irons or 3 irons or whatever in comparison to the drivers and the 3-woods. So big advantage there. So moving on from this, does this mean you should go after all bombers? No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't just go all bombers and keep it that black and white. But I would say you should put an emphasis on this when you're making your picks. I think it's a good thing to do. Some shorter hitters, again, like I said, have done well here in the past, but simply that their margin for error is slimmer because their precision has to be that much better. And in the instances where we have seen shorter hitters done well, they were able to battle through that slim margin of error and fortunate enough to avoid disaster. But again, like I said, slimmer margin of error. The other reason why I would focus more on these people also is you're probably going to hear a lot of advice this week, I think, in other podcasts or videos or streams or whatever it might be, or articles, that how putting and scrambling will win at Oakmont, and it usually wins at the U.S. Open. That's just not true for Oakmont because Oakmont is simply a different animal. It just is. Some of those great putters, and if some of these great putters are heavily owned or people that are more focused on short game, if they're heavily owned, it's all the more reason to fade them and not use them in your lineups, especially when it comes to the Millionaire Maker. So what else should we target? We obviously want to fade the players who will be very highly owned. I will discuss some of the specific names in the next video for who I think will be very highly owned. Since this is a major and the salaries on DraftKings for the Millionaire Maker came out a little bit earlier like they usually do for majors, we will probably see some good odds per dollar. Comparing the price of the golfers versus the Vegas odds or the sportsbook odds, if you will. That should be a good strong indicator to get us started who will probably be highly owned. But I'll say this for right now, just before we even get to part 2. I think there are several golfers in the 8 and 7K range who have a really good shot at winning this tournament. The stars usually have the highest floors by far. They're usually obviously the best people to obviously win the tournament, of course, but they obviously have the highest floors in terms of like making the cut and posting a top 20 or whatever it might be. But this is the one tournament in the U.S. Open, and especially at a place like Oakmont, where those floors of the higher players will be much lower and more closer to what the floors are for the average players. At the same time, it is a major, and there are enough star players in this tournament that we can certainly find some of them that won't be super highly owned that I may be recommending here in the next day or two. But just to keep an eye on that the floors of the high salary players will probably will be not the same, but it'll be closer to what the average players are than your average tournament. Another thing we want to focus on is what players generally do well on tough golf courses or in very tough conditions. The best way to actually just simply do this is to go back and look at previous rounds or tournaments that just kind of fit this category. General golf knowledge and history of you just watching tournaments obviously helps this. Some recent examples are the Masters. The Masters had very tough scoring conditions this year in comparison to some of the years past. The 2007 Masters, ironically, is similar as well. You could go look at the third round of the Players' Championship this year. There are specific U.S. Opens and Open Championships in the past of specific rounds and even specific tournaments you could definitely be looking at over the last handful of years that still can give you some kind of recent history a little bit too with some of these guys and how well they handle some of these adverse conditions or really difficult golf courses. Basically just you want players to handle BS really well. This course will destroy you mentally. It just is a grind from first tee to the 18th green. It's a common thing that's said about U.S. Opens, but it is especially true at Oakmont. And this course actually can destroy you physically a little bit as well. It's certainly very hilly, but at the same time, I will say this, that like Phil Mickelson, I think he actually ended up finishing the round, but Phil Mickelson, who did not make the cut at Oakmont, he actually suffered a wrist injury. I remember it was at Oakmont in 2007, and this place can kind of lead to some injuries because usually actually kind of wrist injuries. It's because this rough is so thick and you were having to use so much strength hitting out of these gnarly lies in the rough that sometimes the club head just grabs in the grass. It can jerk and make your wrist do things it shouldn't do. And you can be also really awkward lies while trying to hit some of these shots as well, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. So unfortunately, if somebody you have in your lineup suffers an injury out there, there might be a little bit more likelihood of a WD here, although if they're in contention, I'm sure they're going to try and suck it up and play through it. But if they're out of this early on, WDs are a little bit more of a possibility here than they would maybe traditionally be at other tournaments. So in any case, just a heads up on that. And then, lastly, the tee time waves. Yes, this is very important. As of right now, and I'm recording this on a late Sunday evening, technically Monday morning now. As of right now, there is supposed to be rain beginning Wednesday evening, possibly all day Thursday, and even during the day on Friday. Yes, this could make the golf course play a little bit easier and help slow the golf course down a little bit, but Oakmont is pretty well designed, and the USGA is very good at this to make the golf course still play extremely fast and difficult. So whereas rain may soften the golf course at some other places and make a huge difference, I don't think it's going to make as big of a difference here, just the way the golf course is laid out and set up, if you will. And of course, the wind will affect it more because the trees are not there protecting the wind gusts. Speaking of wind, the wind is supposed to be relatively calm during the tournament. As of right now, it's very early, but Friday afternoon, during some potential rain, the winds are supposed to be more up in the 10 to 15 mile an hour range Friday afternoon. So potentially right now, Thursday afternoon, Friday morning could be really good and definitely worth targeting. But again, as I said, very early. I wouldn't worry about it too much as of right now. You definitely want to look at this Wednesday night, though, because tee time advantages are important, generally speaking, if there really is a clear-cut advantage, and there really haven't been very many this year at all. And even the ones that have been, they've been only slight advantages. It's been a pretty mellow year, despite all the rain. Despite all the rain we've been having and weather delays. As far as tee time advantages, there have not been many this year. But the key here, and why it's so important here, is because the harder the golf course is, usually exponentially, with a weather advantage and a tee time advantage, it becomes that exponentially that much bigger of an advantage, if you will, on the top of the golf course. The bigger the advantage is when you focus on tee time waves. There we go. So that can definitely. So I would certainly check back in on Wednesday. Look at the rain. Look at the wind. See if we can get a good layout here. And of course, we'll be talking about this on the forums on DailyFantasyWinners.com in the PGA section, of course. And that is it for this edition, part one of the U.S. Open preview. Part two will be up, should be up Tuesday evening. I really hope it is. And at the absolute worst, it'll be up Wednesday morning. But in any case, part two, that'll be just the picks. It'll focus on the Millionaire in particular. And feel free to hit me up on the Daily Fantasy forum in the PGA section. Ask any questions. We can talk about, discuss things. If you like this video and some of the other stuff we've been doing, please remember to like and subscribe to our Twitch and YouTube channels here at Daily Fantasy Winners. And then, of course, you can follow me at Nicky Skevich on Twitter and Daily Fantasy Winners at DFantasyWinners. All right. Thanks, everyone.